Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander together into the warm night air of ancient Egypt, where the Nile glimmers like a ribbon of silver under the moonlight. The palm trees are still, the breeze is heavy with the scent of lotus blossoms, and you, yes you, are about to slip quietly into a story so curious it feels almost like a dream someone forgot to wake up from. Imagine walking through a mud brick alley at night, past clay lamps flickering on windowsills, until you arrive at a quiet home. Inside, a wife sits cross-legged on a woven mat, carefully arranging little carved figurines that look suspiciously like her husband. You lean in, and before you can even form the question, the story begins to unfold. It's not the sort of thing you'd expect to find in your history textbook, and yet it happened. Wives slept with miniature statues of their husbands. I'll warn you now, if you think your IKEA nightstand clutter is overwhelming, you're in for a surprise. And if you tried living here? Between the heat, the bugs, and the constant sand in your sandals, you probably wouldn't last a week. Or as I like to say, you sure wouldn't survive without air conditioning, bug spray, and Wi-Fi. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself wandering deeper into the stillness of this Egyptian night. The houses around you are simple. Mud brick walls packed tight against each other, flat roofs where some families sleep outdoors during the hottest months. Somewhere nearby, a donkey shuffles, a clay jar tips and rolls, and the air is filled with the distant croak of frogs from the Nile. But your attention is caught by the rhythm of home life, the gentle pulse of people winding down after a day lived in the heat of the sun. Inside the house you just entered, the floor is cool beneath your bare feet, swept smooth with rush mats. The walls are plain but hung with small amulets, charms meant to keep away scorpions or bad spirits. A single oil lamp casts golden shadows, the flame bending when you breathe too close. The wife at the center of the room glances at the figurine in her hand. It's small, carved from wood or stone, with features just sharp enough to be recognized. The nose a little too big, the shoulders a little too square, but clearly modeled after her absent husband. She tucks it beside her bed, almost the way you might nestle a pillow into place before sleep. And you notice something familiar in this foreign space. She smooths her linen dress, yawns, and turns to the little figure, as though it will listen. Maybe she whispers about the day's chores, maybe she mutters complaints about the neighbors. Because even in 1200 BC, there's always that one neighbor with noisy goats. The statue just sits there, silent, dependable, immune to gossip. In that quiet moment, you realize it isn't only about ritual. It's about company, comfort, and the desire to hold on to love when distance has pulled two people apart. The Egyptians built pyramids to last forever. But here in the hush of a small bedroom, they were just like anyone else, trying to carry love across the stretch of absence. The wife folds herself on the mat, the figurine within arm's reach, and a sense of calm spreads through the room. You watching, feel your own eyelids grow heavy. The rhythms of her breath, the flicker of the lamp, the murmur of a city settling into sleep, all of it pulls you deeper into the strangeness and tenderness of this world. And isn't that something? We picture the ancient past as grand, heavy, filled with gods and pharaohs and endless stone. Yet here you are, witnessing the gentlest of nightly routines. A woman, her husband far away, finding solace in a carved reminder of his presence. It's both odd and entirely relatable. After all, Some people today can't fall asleep without hugging a body pillow shaped like a shark. You smile at the thought, because history has always been less about the what and more about the how people coped. As you step back, the Nile glimmers again through a tiny window, and the hum of the crickets swells like a lullaby. You're still awake, but the story has only just begun. And like the desert night itself, it stretches vast and slow before you. You're still standing in that dimly lit room, your gaze lingering on the little wooden figure by her bedside, when the sounds of the wider household drift in. The truth is, if you really want to understand why a wife would keep such an object so close, you need to step outside of that bedroom and into the flow of everyday Egyptian home life. You shuffle back into the main space of the house, more open, with reed mats stacked in a corner, clay jars of beer cooling in a pit of damp sand, and baskets of bread tucked away. The air smells faintly of onions and garlic, staples of their diet, and of smoke from a hearth that refuses to die down even in the heat of the night. Life here is not glamorous. The Egyptians may have built monumental temples that still tower today, but most families lived in modest, practical spaces. And you can feel that practicality under your bare soles, the rough floor, the uneven plaster on the walls, the low wooden stool wobbling in the corner. Yet there's also warmth in the way the family has arranged everything. Jars neatly sealed with mud stoppers, a pile of folded linen waiting to be bleached in the sun tomorrow, children curled up together under a single woven blanket. You notice how central the wife is to this space. She isn't simply waiting for her husband to return, she's orchestrating the rhythm of the household. The food is her domain, the children her responsibility, the weaving loom at the back of the house her daily companion. Even the brewing of beer, a thick, slightly sour concoction, falls largely into her hands. You imagine her stirring it, wiping sweat from her brow, and muttering that at least her absent husband isn't around to complain that it tastes watery this week. You smile at the thought, 3,000 years ago, and marital bickering was already an Olympic sport. The figurine in the bedroom isn't a random curiosity. It's one thread in a tapestry of domestic life woven out of both necessity and affection. You remember that wives here had unusual legal standing compared to other ancient societies. They could own property, initiate divorce, and manage their own finances. Imagine that. The year is 1200 BC, and an Egyptian wife already has more autonomy than many women did just a century ago in our world. With that power came responsibility. Running a household was less about waiting prettily in a corner and more about balancing books, bartering with neighbors, and keeping the place from falling apart while the husband was off hauling stone or serving in the army. And here's where the humor sneaks in again. Picture her, juggling children, grinding grain, patching linen, and still making time to whisper sweet nothings, or maybe pointed criticisms, to a carved statuette. If multitasking were an Olympic event, she'd win the gold while simultaneously baking bread and side-eyeing the gods. Every corner of the house tells you something about this rhythm. There's a basket of dates that will serve as tomorrow's breakfast, sticky and sweet. There are amulets tucked into doorways, meant to protect against scorpions, because nothing ruins family dinner faster than a venomous surprise. There's a water jar with a porous surface, slowly cooling its contents by evaporation. And there's the faint scent of incense lingering, a reminder that religion seeps into every moment here, from waking prayers to bedtime murmurs. You trace your fingers along a shelf where small objects rest, cosmetic jars made of alabaster, coal sticks for lining the eyes, and combs carved from bone. You realize these aren't mere luxuries. They're daily tools, as essential to the identity of the household as pots and pans. The wife, carefully grooming herself even when alone, is expressing something powerful, the desire to maintain connection, to honor her absent husband by holding on to rituals of beauty. And isn't that familiar? In the modern world, maybe you put on a nice shirt for a video call even when wearing pajama pants underneath. Or maybe you spray a little cologne before heading to the grocery store, just in case you bump into someone interesting. The impulse is the same. You want to be seen, to be remembered as more than just the caretaker of chores. The walls of this house hold secrets. Scratched onto plaster are simple doodles, children playing with crude drawings of animals, perhaps the wife herself sketching a lotus flower when the day felt too heavy. These marks may never have been meant for anyone to see, but they whisper across time to you now. They tell you that life here was layered, mundane, intimate, and occasionally playful. As the night deepens, you catch a glimpse of neighbors outside, voices carrying softly. A man speaks of taxes owed in grain. A woman complains about the temple demanding another offering. The world outside the home presses in with politics, economics, and endless obligations. But in here, the wife creates a cocoon. The figurine of her husband is not just a substitute, it's a reminder that amidst the noise of the wider world, there is a private space of loyalty, affection, and yes, a little absurd humor. You lean back against the wall, feeling the rough plaster cool against your shoulders. The oil lamp flickers again, shadows of jars and baskets dancing across the room. For a moment, you could almost believe you live here. The same chores, the same worries, the same comfort and small rituals. Except, of course, your version might involve doom scrolling on your phone instead of whispering to a tiny statue. Some things change, but some stay hilariously the same. And as you close your eyes briefly, letting the hum of frogs and distant laughter wash over you, you realize this is just the beginning. The home life of ancient Egypt is the soil in which stranger customs grew, including the one that led to those peculiar statues. To understand them, you'll need to wander deeper still, through contracts, rituals, and the shadows of gods that slip quietly into even the most ordinary of rooms. You drift further into the rhythm of Egyptian life, and soon your focus shifts from the smell of onions and the flicker of lamps towards something more official, more binding, the marriage contract. Now, don't roll your eyes just yet, because while contracts sound about as exciting as watching paint dry, in ancient Egypt they were full of quirks that shaped the love stories of ordinary people. You sit down cross-legged on a woven mat, and in your hands you picture a papyrus scroll, its ink still sharp, the script looping in neat rows. Marriage here wasn't sealed by a church bell or a kiss under mistletoe. It was sealed by ink, promises, and an agreement so practical it could make a modern prenup look like a Hallmark card. The Egyptians believed in writing things down. If the husband promised to provide a certain measure of grain, clothing, or silver, you bet it was spelled out clearly, line after line. If the wife brought property or dowry into the marriage, that too was carefully listed. Forget roses and romantic vows, this was love with a ledger. You lean closer and notice the details. A contract might say, if the marriage ended, the wife had the right to keep her dowry and maybe even claim a share of the husband's property. Imagine living in 1200 BC and realizing you had more legal protection as a wife than in some parts of the world 3 millennia later. Surprising, isn't it? It's as if the ancient Egyptians were saying, sure, we'll mummify our cats and believe the sun god sails a boat across the sky every night, but when it comes to relationships, we want the paperwork solid. And here's a curious twist. Love letters existed alongside these contracts. Clay shards and papyrus fragments survive, where husbands wrote to wives, confessing affection and longing. So you have this delightful contradiction. On one hand, a legal document that reads like a business deal, and on the other, tender little notes that read like awkward text messages before emojis were invented. One surviving note might say something like, "I am well, and I pray to the gods for your health. Do not forget me." Sweet, but you can almost hear the subtext. "Don't you dare replace me while I'm gone." Now you're grinning, because it all feels so familiar. The contract is like setting up a joint bank account, and the love letter is the equivalent of sending your partner a slightly passive-aggressive, "miss you" text. Across thousands of years, humans have never really stopped juggling the practical with the sentimental. Of course, the contracts weren't just about property or grain. They also laid out responsibilities. A husband was expected to provide for his wife, but the wife's obligations were sometimes spelled out too: loyalty, managing the household, raising children. And that brings us back, quietly, to the little figurine waiting in the bedroom. If your husband is off hauling blocks of limestone for some pharaoh's tomb, you're left holding the contract in one hand and the kids in the other. A small carved statue, silent, loyal, never wandering, suddenly seems like a more comforting stand-in than parchment and ink. But not every contract was airtight. Some historians still debate whether these agreements always held up in practice. Were wives truly empowered, or was it a legal structure that mostly benefited wealthy families? Some believe the protections were real, others argue they were more symbolic than practical. The truth is hidden in fragments, and the debate continues. You imagine modern scholars hunched over faded papyri, arguing as passionately as married couples themselves. As you sit here, you begin to see the connection. A wife whispers to her figurine not only out of affection but also out of duty, a reflection of the expectations laid out in her marriage contract. The figure becomes a tangible anchor for those promises. You provide grain, I provide loyalty. You travel far, I hold down the home. In the absence of the man, the statue embodies his side of the deal, quietly standing watch. And the humor of it all? Imagine being the husband, coming home after months of work, only to find your wife has been talking to a better-behaved version of you all along. No grumbling, no sandals left in the wrong place, no snoring. Honestly, the figurine might have been the superior roommate. The lamp beside you flickers again, shadows stretching across the papyrus you imagine in your lap. Outside, the now hums with frogs, the air thick with night. Inside, the weight of these contracts, these written promises, presses gently on your mind. You realize you're not just learning about history, you're watching the oldest dance of all, love balanced against obligation, intimacy woven with practicality. And in that space, the little statues stop feeling strange. They feel inevitable. The room grows quieter, and your eyes linger on the scroll one last time before the ink fades, the words dissolve into shadow, and you're left drifting deeper into the story. The papyrus contracts blur into the background as you wander back toward that dimly lit bedroom, and your attention falls once again on the little statue resting so patiently near the woven mat. Up close, it feels less like a curiosity and more like a presence, carved from stone, wood, or sometimes faience that gleams faintly under the lamp's glow. The wife shifts it gently, almost like you might adjust a picture frame, making sure her miniature husband looks just right before sleep. These sacred miniatures were never just toys. They were embodiments, tiny vessels carrying weight far beyond their modest size. To you, it looks like a doll, an oddly proportioned, stiff little figure. But to her, It is layered with meaning, a symbol of protection, a reminder of a promise, even a bridge between the world of the living and the unseen. Egyptians loved their miniatures. You think of all the little objects found in tombs, boats, servants, food offerings, tiny replicas meant to serve the dead in the afterlife. If a clay servant could bake your bread in eternity, why couldn't a carved husband keep you company in the lonely hours of night? You noticed the details. Some figurines were painted with dark kohl outlines around the eyes, just like real men wore. Some had carefully etched wigs or tiny carved jewelry. Others were crude, rough blocks with a vague resemblance at best. But in either form, they carried intimacy. She might trace her fingers along its shoulders, smoothing its rough edges as though coaxing warmth into lifeless material. You can almost hear her murmuring a memory, the way her husband laughed when their child took his first steps, or how he stubbornly insisted he could repair the loom, only to make it worse. And here's the comic twist. Imagine the husband seeing this statue. Would he laugh at its likeness, boast that it captured his strong jawline, or grumble that his nose wasn't really that big? You know the answer. Husbands everywhere always find something to nitpick. But the wife wouldn't care. For her, the little figure wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. Miniatures held spiritual weight too. The Egyptians believed objects could carry a spark of the person they represented. Just as a statue of a god could serve as a focal point for divine presence, a miniature husband could, in a quiet sense, carry his essence into the home. When you stroke its head or whisper to its carved lips, you weren't just talking to wood, you were touching the thread that tied you back to the absent man himself. And in the deep stillness of an Egyptian night, with the desert pressing close and the Nile whispering in the distance, that thread must have felt as real as breath. Historians still puzzle over this. Were these figurines primarily religious? Were they magical charms, or simply affectionate tokens? Some argue they were ritual substitutes meant to guard the bedchamber. Others believe they were intimate keepsakes, meant to preserve the sense of marriage across distance. The truth probably wove all these meanings together. You know how sometimes you keep an old photograph in your wallet, or how a soldier might carry a locket with a picture of his sweetheart? That's practical magic in its own right, the power of memory turned into matter. And when you think about it, the Egyptians just took this to the next level. Instead of a flat picture, they wanted something solid, three-dimensional, something you could hold in the dark when loneliness pressed hardest. A miniature husband that would never scold, never wander, and never leave the bed. Unlike the real one, who might be gone for months hauling stones in blistering sun, the figurine was utterly dependable. In a way, it was an ancient version of a body pillow, though let's admit, hugging carved wood is less comfortable than modern plush. You smile at the absurdity, but the need behind it feels achingly familiar. The lamp burns lower. The wife smooths the mat, draws the figurine a little closer, and finally stretches beside it. Her breathing steadies, her eyelids grow heavy, and the miniature seems to stand guard at her side. Outside, the city exhales into silence, cats prowl alleys, and the stars hang like white seeds scattered across the sky. You lean back and realize, these little statues are less strange than they seemed. They are sacred, yes, but also practical. They're the answer to a question every culture has asked. How do you hold on to someone when distance threatens to erase them? The Egyptians answered with stone and wood, shaping absence into presence, night after night. And as you step back, the figure in the shadow seems to turn its painted eyes toward you. Silent, watchful, just as it was meant to be. The night deepens, and as you linger in that small bedroom, you notice the wife is not merely resting beside the figurine. She leans close, her lips moving faintly, words slipping out like threads of breath. The statue isn't just sitting there, it's listening. Or at least, she believes it is. You tilt your head, catching fragments of her murmurs, complaints about the neighbors, gossip from the market, maybe even a prayer for her husband's safe return. And suddenly you realize you've stepped into something more intimate than a contract or a household duty. You're witnessing whispered rituals. These weren't elaborate temple ceremonies with priests, incense, and chants echoing under stone pillars. No, these were quiet, private, half-hidden rituals performed in the shadows of the bedroom. The wife speaks as if the figurine holds power, not the grand power of gods, but the softer magic of presence. She might dab a little perfumed oil on it, as though to freshen her absent husband's clothes. She might brush its surface with her fingertips, the way you absent-mindedly scroll your phone screen at night, searching for connection and silence. It's tender, but there's humor too. Imagine her muttering to the figurine about how long it's been since he left, or joking softly, "At least you don't snore." Maybe she rolls her eyes at the tiny wooden face and grumbles about how he never fixes the broken stool. And yet she still smiles afterward, because even a one-sided conversation is better than none at all. You chuckle quietly, because somewhere across time, you know she'd laugh with you at the absurdity. Sometimes, these whispered rituals carried a more serious weight. Egyptians believed words had power. The act of speaking could shape reality. A blessing whispered into the night was not just talk, it was an indication. So when she leaned close and murmured, "Return safely," she wasn't only venting. She was weaving her hope into the threads of the universe, the way someone today might light a candle or keep a photo on a nightstand. The figurine became a focal point, a channel for devotion, love, and maybe a little desperate bargaining with the unseen. Historians debate this too. Were these nightly whispers religious acts, magical rituals, or simply emotional coping mechanisms? Some argue they were echoes of larger temple practices, scaled down for the household. Others see them as purely personal, more like diary entries spoken aloud. The evidence is fragile. Tiny fragments of papyrus describing household charms, mentions of figurines in burial contexts, but the truth remains partly hidden in silence. Still, the everydayness of it is striking. You can imagine the rhythm. She tidies the mat, sets the lamp low, checks that the children are asleep, and then turns to her miniature companion. It's like slipping into an old habit, as natural as brushing your teeth. And it worked. These rituals gave her comfort, a sense of continuity, and perhaps even the illusion that her absent husband could hear her words carried on the desert breeze. And here's where you can't help but laugh again. Think about your own nightly rituals. Maybe you check if the door is locked 3 times, or you whisper to your cat before bed, or you set an alarm even though you know you'll hit snooze anyway. Rituals don't always need to make sense, they just need to make you feel safe. For her, that little statue was both anchor and audience, a silent confidant who never argued back. Honestly, not a bad arrangement. The lamp wavers, the flame bending low, and the wife finally pulls the figurine closer to her mat, whispering one last phrase before drifting toward sleep. Her voice trails off, carried away into the hum of crickets outside. The figurine, silent as ever, stands guard through the night. You lean back and feel the rhythm of her ritual settle over you too, calming, steady, almost like a lullaby in itself. And as the shadows stretch long across the room, you sense something more at work. These whispers aren't just about comfort. They're about weaving presence into absence, about stitching together the frayed edges of distance with words soft enough to vanish but strong enough to endure. The house has gone quiet, the whispers fading into the hum of frogs by the Nile, but you don't drift off yet. Because here's the strange thing, in this small bedroom, where a woman curls beside a figurine of her husband, she is not alone. No, if you look closer, the shadows shimmer just a little, and you can almost sense other presences slipping in. Gods in the bedroom. It sounds dramatic, but to the Egyptians, the divine was everywhere, woven into meals, carved into doorways, whispered into rituals at the edge of sleep. And if you're thinking, well, that's intrusive, you're not wrong. Imagine trying to sleep while knowing that a falcon-headed deity might be lurking over your shoulder like some eternal hall monitor. But for them, this was comfort, not intrusion. Take Hathor, for example, the goddess of love, beauty, and music. She was often called mistress of the house, a divine presence believed to protect marriages. You picture her here, invisible but hovering, a soft cow-headed figure radiating warmth, as the wife whispers into the dark. Then there's Bes, the squat, lion-faced dwarf god who was basically the original nightlight. Ugly by design, Bes was thought to frighten away evil spirits that lurked in the shadows. You can almost imagine him standing by the bed, grinning toothily, glaring into the corners like a bouncer at a very exclusive nightclub, the cover charge being your eternal soul. These gods, strange as they seem, were deeply tied to intimacy. The figurine of the husband wasn't only a reminder of love, it was also thought to channel protective forces. The wife may have believed the gods themselves leaned closer when she whispered to the miniature, guarding her, blessing the absent man, and sealing their bond. The figurine was a kind of spiritual Wi-Fi router, connecting her small room to the vast cosmic network of deities. And unlike your home internet, it never cut out at the worst possible moment. There's humor in this too. Imagine explaining to your modern self, "Yes, I sleep with a wooden doll of my husband. Also, a dwarf god with a lion face is standing in the corner watching over me." Sounds like the plot of a very niche horror movie. Yet for her, it was reassurance. When the desert howled outside, when sickness or scorpions threatened, when loneliness gnawed like sand in her teeth, the knowledge that the gods cared enough to visit her room made the darkness bearable. And of course, the historians can't agree. Were these divine presences truly believed to inhabit the figurines? Or were the figurines simply reminders of a divine order? Some scholars argue they were talismans, infused with protective spells. Others suggest they were merely symbolic tokens, their spiritual weight exaggerated by later interpretations. The debate continues, much like your own internal argument over whether the creak in your hallway is just the house settling or something more. Still, one thing is clear, these gods made intimacy sacred. The bond between husband and wife wasn't only personal, it was under divine surveillance. To whisper to the figurine was also to whisper to the gods, weaving your marriage into a larger cosmic fabric. The wife in that room wasn't just keeping the memory of her husband alive, she was enacting a ritual that linked love to eternity. You glance again at the figurine, its painted eyes catching a glint of lamplight. In the corner, Bes, imagined or real, grins like a guardian gargoyle. Above, Hathor's invisible presence hangs like a mother's lullaby. And you? You're simply watching, lulled by the thought that even the smallest gestures, a whispered word to a wooden statue, could echo into the divine. The wife stretches out on her mat, comforted by this strange blend of intimacy and sacredness. The figurine is her companion, but the gods are her witnesses. And as her breathing steadies, you too feel the rhythm of protection wrapping around you, soft and steady, like the slow drift of the Nile beneath the stars. The gods may be hovering in the shadows, but as dawn creeps across the desert and the household stirs, the reality of absence presses in again. The husband is gone. Not gone forever, at least not yet, but gone to the quarries, to the army, to the sprawling projects demanded by pharaohs who dreamed of eternity. And you, standing in this little house, feel the hollow space he's left behind. Absence and longing. That's the rhythm here. The wife tucks the figurine close not only out of ritual, but because the man himself might be gone for months, even years. Imagine him on a work crew dragging limestone blocks under a punishing sun, or stationed at a border garrison far from the Nile. In a world without phones, without letters delivered in neat envelopes, silence was the rule. She might not know if he was safe, if he'd return, or if the gods had claimed him somewhere beyond the horizon. And so the figurine became her substitute, her stand-in husband who never failed to come home at night. You picture her daily routine unfolding without him. She wakes, grinds grain into flour, bakes the rough loaves, tends to children, barters at the market. Every chore is a reminder of his absence. She carries jars of water from the Nile, balancing them with practiced ease, and perhaps mutters under her breath, "This was easier when he was here." You smile, because even in 1200 BC, the inner monologue of, "Why do I have to do everything myself?" was alive and well. Sometimes she holds the figurine and whispers more urgently, as if confiding her loneliness into its painted face. It's no longer just ritual, it's therapy. The statue becomes an anchor in the drift of waiting, a reassurance that she's not entirely alone. You can almost feel her breath quicken, her words catching in her throat, as if she's trying to speak across the distance to the man himself. Historians note this emotional layer too. They've found letters written by Egyptian women to absent husbands, scratched on pottery shards or papyrus. Some plead for their return, some scold them for staying away too long, others simply describe the children's antics, or the price of bread. What survives is raw, ordinary humanity. And though we don't have a transcript of her whispers to the figurine, you can imagine they sounded much the same. "The children miss you. The goats are driving me mad. Come home soon." And of course, you can't help but laugh at the irony. The figurine may have been a better listener than the real man ever was. No interruptions, no dismissive grunts, no falling asleep mid-story. Just quiet presence. Honestly, it's the kind of emotional availability most modern therapists charge by the hour for. Still, absence cuts deep. The figurine offers comfort, but it's no replacement for the warmth of a real body beside her on the mat. No replacement for the shared laughter, the whispered jokes, the small daily arguments that, strangely, make a relationship whole. You sense that ache, the same one humans across all ages have carried, the longing for someone who is away, the gnawing fear they might never return. And yet, here in this dim bedroom, she refuses to let absence have the final word. By holding the figurine, by whispering into the night, she turns longing into connection. She stitches a bridge across the silence with threads of ritual, love, and stubborn hope. The figurine, lifeless though it may be, becomes a living symbol of endurance. Outside, the Nile glimmers with first light, fishermen casting their nets, children chasing each other on dusty streets. Inside, the figurine rests by her side, standing in for the man who will, with luck and the gods' mercy, walk through the door again one day. And as you watch, you realize this is less about strangeness and more about survival. She isn't clinging to superstition, she's inventing a way to live with longing. The days stretch on, and the absence doesn't get easier. But instead of crumbling under loneliness, the wife leans deeper into something older, stranger, and oddly comforting: myths of protection. That little figurine of her husband doesn't just sit there like a wooden roommate. It is believed to guard her, warding off dangers both seen and unseen. You notice how she places the figurine carefully by her head when she sleeps, almost as if she's arranging a personal bodyguard. Egyptians lived in a world where the night was never empty. Spirits prowled in the dark, snakes slithered under thresholds, and fevers struck without warning. The miniature husband was more than a token of love, it was a shield. Whisper to it, and perhaps you'd sleep undisturbed. Tuck it near, and perhaps no scorpion would crawl across your mat. You can almost hear her murmur, "Keep watch for me tonight." And here's where it gets fascinating. Egyptians didn't separate the practical from the mystical. Everything had layers. A carved figurine could simultaneously be a reminder of her husband, a charm against nightmares, and a pledge of loyalty. Imagine buying a product today that promised, "Keeps away burglars, prevents bad dreams, strengthens your marriage." That's not an Amazon listing, it's Egyptian spiritual multitasking. Of course, some of these myths were delightfully exaggerated. Stories floated around that figurines could keep away not only evil spirits, but also gossiping neighbors, thieves, or even wandering infidelity. One tale hints that a woman who slept beside her husband's statue would never stray, because the figurine carried his gaze and his authority. You can't help but laugh. Picture a 6-inch wooden doll glaring up at you with judgmental eyes every time you so much as look at another man. Not exactly seductive. More like the original "Find My Husband" app. Historians, naturally, don't agree on all this. Some believe the protective myths were symbolic. Others argue they were genuine beliefs woven into nightly ritual. Did women truly think a wooden carving scared away evil spirits, or was it more about psychological comfort? The way you might lock your door twice, not because the first lock doesn't work, but because the act itself calms you? The debate continues, the truth lodged somewhere between superstition and survival. And yet, when you sit in this room and watch her, it feels real enough. She sets the figurine close, touches its head with 2 fingers, then rolls onto her mat. The figurine stands guard, silent, steady, the night pressing in all around. The ritual has worked, not necessarily because a spirit has been banished, but because she can finally close her eyes. And in that sense, the myth of protection has done its job. You smile again, because it's familiar. Think about how you sleep better with a night light, or how you might double-check that your phone alarm is set, even though you've already looked at it 3 times. None of it changes the universe, but it changes how you feel about the universe. The Egyptians just made that feeling tangible, carving reassurance into stone and wood. And if you squint, you can almost see the figurine glowing faintly in the dark, a little sentinel standing between her and the chaos of the world. Maybe it doesn't really scare away demons, but it certainly scares away despair. And sometimes, that's the same thing. The myths of protection wrap the room like a soft blanket, but daily life has a way of poking holes in even the most sacred rituals. Because let's be honest, life with a miniature husband wasn't always solemn or mystical. Sometimes, it was downright funny. Everyday humor slipped into these moments, and if you lean closer now, you'll see it too. Picture this. The wife is rearranging her mat for sleep, and as she shifts the figurine, it tips forward with a soft clunk onto the floor. She sighs, scoops it up, dusts it off, and maybe mutters, "Well, you're clumsier in wood than you ever were in person." The little statue, painted eyes staring blankly, is no help at all. It just lies there, waiting to be propped back up. And you can't help but chuckle, because somehow, even in her loneliness, she finds a moment of absurdity. These figurines weren't indestructible. A carved wooden leg could snap, a nose might chip, the paint might flake after years of being handled. Imagine explaining that to your absent husband. "Oh, by the way, your statue lost its nose last week, but don't worry, I still sleep with it." You can almost hear him groaning across the miles. "Great! Even my stand-in looks worse for wear." It's a comedy of intimacy, played out in clay and stone. There are stories in archaeology of figurines found with exaggerated features, oversized eyes, stubby hands, crooked proportions. Maybe the artisans weren't skilled, or maybe they leaned into caricature. Either way, you can imagine wives laughing as they received these little effigies. "Really? This is supposed to be you? Well, at least it doesn't leave dirty sandals lying around." The humor took the sting out of absence, turning loneliness into something a little more bearable. And here's the thing, Egyptians were not a humorless people. Graffiti scratched into tomb walls shows stick figures, jokes, even crude drawings that proved laughter threaded through their world. So why wouldn't that humor creep into the bedroom, too? When you live surrounded by gods, rituals, and endless obligations, a little comic relief is not just welcome, it's survival. Historians debate whether the figurines were treated with solemn reverence or casual familiarity. Some suggest they were handled carefully, honored as sacred. Others argue they might have been more like household companions, cherished but also teased. The truth? Probably both. Humans rarely keep the sacred completely free of laughter. Think of how you might laugh at a family heirloom that's been chipped but still treasured, or how you joke about the quirks of someone you miss deeply. The wife, leaning back on her mat, may have chuckled too. Perhaps she tapped the figurine's forehead playfully, or rolled her eyes at its silence when she asked a question. And in those moments, humor wasn't disrespect. It was intimacy. Proof that even in absence, she could still share the playful rhythm of marriage. And doesn't that sound familiar? Even today, people laugh in the middle of grief, make jokes to soften the ache of missing someone. It's not denial, it's how the heart survives. The little figurine wasn't just a symbol of protection or loyalty. It was a reminder that love always comes wrapped in laughter, even when carved into wood. You sit quietly as the wife drifts toward sleep again, her figurine tucked close, its nose slightly chipped, its posture crooked. It doesn't matter. She still whispers to it, still smiles, still finds comfort. The absurdity doesn't erase the devotion, it deepens it. And you realize, as the lamp flickers low, that humor might be the oldest form of protection there is. The laughter fades into silence, and the night folds in around you once more. But as you lean closer to the little figurine by her side, you notice something new. Next to it lies a shard of pottery, an ostrakhan, with careful scratches etched into its surface. The marks aren't random. They're words. A message. A love letter written in ink, tucked beside the miniature husband like a secret waiting to be read. Love letters in clay. That's what you're seeing. Egyptians didn't always have neat stationery or scented envelopes. Sometimes they wrote on papyrus, yes, but often they used broken shards of pottery or scraps of limestone, recycling the discarded bits of daily life. And yet the words on these rough fragments are anything but careless. They are tender, clumsy, and achingly human. Imagine a husband, away on a work site, scribbling in awkward hieratic script. May you and the children be well. Do not forget me. I dream of your bread and your laughter. He presses the letter into the hands of a messenger, who trudges back to the village days later. The wife reads it aloud, smiling, maybe tearing up, and then places it beside the figurines so the miniature can hear it too. As if the statue could absorb the words, hold them, and return them in silence. And sometimes she writes back. Archaeologists have found letters from women to their husbands, their words simple but powerful. I tend the house. The fields grow. The children ask for you. Come home soon. You can almost hear her voice catch as she scratches the words. Then she sets the shard near the figurine, whispering them aloud one last time before sleep. It's oddly moving, and funny in its own way. Because you realize how universal these clumsy letters are. Thousands of years later, people are still sending messages that read almost the same. Miss you. Hope you're eating well. When are you coming back? History doesn't erase longing. It just changes the medium. From ostraca to text messages, it's all the same heart beating through words. But here's the curious part. These letters weren't only for the living. Some have been found tucked into tombs, written to the dead. Wives wrote to husbands who had passed away, asking them for help, complaining about hardships, or simply declaring continued love. One woman wrote, "Why did you leave me? Do not abandon me. Protect me." It's heartbreaking, but also oddly comforting. The figurine beside her mat, the letter at its side, they blurred the boundary between presence and absence, life and death. Historians argue about this, too. Were these letters meant as actual communication with spirits, or just cathartic expressions of grief and love? Some say they were ritual acts, binding the bond beyond death. Others think they were simply human voices, refusing to fall silent even when the listener was gone. Either way, the effect is the same, connection sustained across impossible distance. And let's admit, there's humor hiding in the tenderness. Imagine the wife writing a letter not only to say she misses her husband but also to complain about daily frustrations. The goat broke the fence again. The neighbor borrowed my pot and hasn't returned it. Why aren't you here to deal with this? You laugh because it sounds like something scrawled in a modern group chat. Love doesn't erase irritation, it folds it in, makes it part of the story. Back in that little bedroom, the wife finishes reading the shard aloud, sets it beside the figurine, and sighs softly. She touches both, the statue with one hand, the letter with the other, as if linking the two together, weaving presence out of words and wood. Then she closes her eyes, and the room fills with stillness once more. You step back, listening to the crickets outside, the soft lap of the Nile against its banks. You realize you're surrounded not just by silence, but by echoes, letters, whispers, laughter, prayers, all looping endlessly through the walls of this house. And you can feel it now, pulsing through the dark, love carved into miniature, etched onto clay, spoken into air. The shard of pottery with its scratched lines fades into the shadows, and you find yourself thinking less about the wife and more about the people who puzzle over her world today. The archaeologists, the Egyptologists, the professors pacing across university lecture halls. Because for all the charm of those figurines and letters, the truth is, no one fully agrees what they meant. Welcome to the debates of historians. It's almost funny, 3,000 years later, and scholars are still arguing like neighbors over a shared fence. Some claim the figurines were sacred household talismans, designed to ward off evil spirits. Others insist they were symbols of loyalty, tokens of love carried into the intimacy of marriage. A few, more cynical voices even suggest they might have been nothing more than decorative toys, the ancient equivalent of a knick-knack on a shelf. And every new discovery only seems to deepen the disagreement. Imagine two historians in a conference room. One slams down a photo of a carved wooden husband and declares, "This is clearly a magical object, infused with protective power." The other adjusts their glasses, waves a dusty papyrus, and replies, "Nonsense, it's just a sentimental keepsake." And somewhere in the corner, a graduate student yawns, wishing they could sneak out for coffee. You smile, because the debates themselves sound almost as human as the figurines. The evidence is maddeningly fragmentary. Archaeologists find figurines buried with women, placed in tombs, or discovered in homes, but the exact context is often lost. Were they part of rituals? Were they simply cherished objects that ended up buried with their owners? No one can say for certain. Even ancient texts are vague. They mention protective charms, household gods, and love tokens, but rarely with enough clarity to pin down exactly what these miniature husbands represented. And here's where it gets delightfully ironic. The Egyptians, who were obsessed with writing everything down, from shopping lists to tax records to how many loaves of bread a worker received each week, never bothered to write, "By the way, here's why my wife keeps a little statue of me next to her bed." No, that mystery they left hanging for us, like a riddle with missing pieces. Some scholars lean heavily toward the magical. They argue that the figurine embodied a protective spell, channeling the absent husband's essence, his loyalty, his watchful presence. Others point to the playful, almost humorous side of these objects, suggesting they were tokens of affection rather than amulets of power. Still others take the middle ground, perhaps they were both. Because in human life, things rarely fit into neat boxes. And isn't that the most relatable thing of all? Think about how we treat objects today. A wedding ring is jewelry, yes, but also a symbol, a promise, and sometimes even a ward against temptation. A photograph of someone you love might be decorative, but it also carries weight beyond its frame. Maybe the Egyptians weren't so different. They simply carved their love and protection into something solid, letting the figurines carry multiple meanings at once. Historians will continue to bicker over it, of course. That's their ritual. Some days the figurine is a talisman, other days a toy, other days a sacred vessel. And while they argue, you're left in the bedroom with the wife, watching her smooth the statue's surface with gentle fingers. To her, the debate didn't matter. It was simply what she needed: protection, presence, comfort, all packed into a tiny piece of carved wood. You lean back and chuckle softly. Maybe the historians are overthinking it. Or maybe that's just what humans always do, spin endless theories about the simplest of gestures. Either way, the figurine remains, silent and stubborn, while voices echo around it across centuries. And as the lamp flickers lower, you find yourself thinking, sometimes the mystery is the point. If the Egyptians had left us a clear answer, the figurines might feel ordinary. But in their silence, they keep their magic, half protection, half joke, half love letter carved into eternity. The voices of historians fade like echoes in a lecture hall, and you drift back to the soft glow of the Nile night. Yet something curious begins to stir in your mind. These figurines, these whispers, these chipped little guardians, they don't feel so foreign anymore. In fact, they feel strangely familiar. Echoes across time. You glance again at the wife curled on her mat, the miniature husband at her side, and suddenly your mind skips forward like a skipping stone across a river. You think of someone today hugging a teddy bear at night. A teenager clutching a stuffed shark from a furniture store. An adult, yes, let's be honest here, an adult curling around a pillow that's been hugged so long it's practically molded into the shape of comfort. And you laugh, because here you are, 3,000 years later, and humans haven't changed much at all. There's something universal in it, the desire to hold something when the person you love isn't there. For Egyptians, it was a carved figurine. For you, maybe it's a worn sweatshirt that still smells faintly like someone you miss. Or a voice message replayed again and again, long after midnight. The object doesn't matter, the longing does. You remember, too, how soldiers in the 20th century carried photographs of sweethearts in their helmets, or how sailors carved trinkets during long voyages, sending them home as tokens of love. The Egyptians simply got there first, chiseling absence into presence with wood and faience. And just like today, the gesture was part silly, part sacred, all human. The humor of it crosses the centuries. Imagine explaining to an Egyptian wife that in the future, people will cuddle giant plush pickles, avocado pillows, or blankets with sleeves to keep loneliness at bay. She might laugh at your absurdity, then nod in recognition, because at the heart of it, it's the same impulse she feels when she whispers to her miniature husband. Comfort has always had a touch of ridiculousness. That's what makes it work. Of course, scholars can't resist trying to trace neat lines across this. Some argue these echoes prove a timeless human psychology, the need for transitional objects, for tangible stand-ins of absent love. Others argue it's coincidence, shaped by culture and circumstance. But you suspect the wife herself wouldn't care. She'd smile at the thought that people thousands of years later are still holding things close at night, still trying to trick their brains into feeling less alone. And you? You realize how tender that continuity is. The idea that across centuries, across continents, humans have whispered into the dark, holding on to dolls, photographs, or pillows. The shapes change, but the need remains, pulsing steady like the Nile itself. The wife shifts in her sleep, murmuring faintly. The figurine doesn't move, but somehow it feels alive with meaning, alive with all the echoes that ripple out from this little room into your own. You reach out, just in your imagination, and brush its wooden shoulder. For a moment, you feel a line of connection stretch across 3 millennia, binding her loneliness to yours, her ritual to the silly, sacred objects on your own nightstand. The night hums with frogs, the air heavy with lotus and sand. And you find yourself smiling in the dark. Because if there's anything boring about history, it's only that we forget how alike we all are. The echoes of the present linger, but soon you find yourself pulled deeper, down into the earth where silence has lasted for thousands of years. Archaeological finds. That's where the story breathes again, when spades of archaeologists, brushes in hand, reveal what time tried to hide. Picture the scene. A team crouches under the blistering Egyptian sun, sweat dripping into the sand, carefully sweeping dust from a fragment of painted wood. The object emerges slowly, delicate as if it might crumble at the wrong breath. And then, it's unmistakable. A little figurine, no taller than your hand, with worn features and faint paint clinging to the eyes. A miniature husband, waiting patiently for millennia. These discoveries aren't confined to bedrooms preserved in villages. Figurines have been found in tombs, placed beside women as if to accompany them into eternity. Some lie next to amulets of protection, scarabs, ankhs, tiny carved gods, suggesting the miniature was part of a broader network of spiritual security. Others are found on domestic altars, alongside bowls of offerings, jars of incense, or carved images of household gods. The placement hints at roles beyond intimacy, bleeding into ritual, religion, and the afterlife. You picture a tomb excavated in Thebes, where archaeologists lifted away limestone blocks and found not gold or jewels, but these humble objects. A figurine tucked gently beside a skeleton's arm. Was it her husband, meant to accompany her into the afterlife? Or was it a symbol of continuity, proof that love should outlast even death? The archaeologists debate, their voices echoing down tunnels that haven't heard human sound in centuries. And yet, the humor persists even here. Some figurines have been found with broken limbs, missing noses, or awkwardly patched repairs. Imagine a woman cherishing hers so much that when the little husband's arm broke off, she glued it back on with resin. You can almost hear her. "Don't worry, dear, you're still perfect." 3,000 years later, someone digs it up and chuckles softly, realizing the tenderness hidden in that repair. Historians interpret the finds in different ways. Were these objects common, accessible to ordinary families, or luxuries for the wealthy? Some digs suggest they were widespread, carved from cheap wood for poorer households, crafted in faience or stone for the elite. Others argue they were rarer, cherished possessions passed down or created only for special occasions. The evidence is scattered, the debate ongoing, the mystery unsolved. But one thing is certain, these figurines mattered enough to survive. They weren't discarded like broken pots or forgotten tools. They were buried, cherished, preserved. Archaeologists may puzzle over their meaning, but the act of preservation speaks louder than words. Something in these objects was worth carrying across centuries, through the silence of sand and stone. You crouch in the imagined tomb, the flicker of a modern lantern echoing the glow of an ancient oil lamp. The little figurine stares back at you, paint faded but presence intact. And you feel it again, the thread of continuity, love hardened into wood and clay, surviving long after breath is gone. You smile because, once again, the ordinary has become extraordinary. Not the golden masks or towering pyramids, but a chipped little statue, waiting in the dark. And somehow, that's what feels most human of all. The tomb walls fade, the lantern's glow softens, and suddenly you're back in that modest little bedroom, the figurine resting patiently at the wife's side. By now you've seen it through so many lenses: ritual, humor, protection, absence, archaeology. But here in the hush of night, what you feel most strongly is something simpler: legacy of intimacy. You realize the figurine isn't just an object, not really. It's a mirror. It reflects what people have always needed: connection when separated, warmth when the world feels cold, the reassurance that love doesn't vanish just because someone isn't physically there. The Egyptians carved their longing into wood. You might scroll through an old photo album, hug a sweatshirt, or keep a voicemail saved. Different tools, same ache. The wife stretches her hand across the mat, fingertips brushing the figurine's shoulder. To anyone else, it's a lump of wood. To her, it's memory, promise, and presence all at once. She closes her eyes, and in that gesture you can almost feel the centuries collapse. Because how many people have done the same? How many have reached for something, anything, that carries the imprint of someone they love? A soldier in World War II clutching a letter, a teenager today hugging a stuffed animal, a widow keeping her partner's ring on the nightstand. All of it echoes the same instinct you see right here. Historians like to argue over whether the figurine was magical, symbolic, or purely sentimental. But in a way, those categories miss the point. It was all of those things at once, because intimacy is complicated. Love is never just practical or just sacred, It's both, tangled up with laughter, longing, and ritual. The figurine carried that tangled weight better than words could. And maybe that's the legacy the Egyptians left us. Not just pyramids and mummies, but the reminder that intimacy itself leaves artifacts. Small objects become vessels for memory, guardians of presence. It doesn't matter if they're carved from stone or stitched in polyester. What matters is the way we pour ourselves into them. You chuckle softly at the thought. Imagine if one day archaeologists thousands of years from now dig up a giant plush avocado or a worn-out hoodie and scratch their heads, arguing about whether it was sacred or silly. They'll probably debate for decades, publishing papers, holding conferences, all while missing the obvious. It was love shaped into something you could hold. The wife sighs in her sleep, her breath steady. The figurine sits in its silent vigil, but you no longer see it as odd. You see it as tender, inevitable, part of a long line of human attempts to bridge the gap between presence and absence. That's the legacy, intimacy made tangible, fragile but enduring, surviving in little objects long after voices fade. The room grows quieter, shadows lengthening across the mat. You feel your own eyelids heavier now, lulled by the rhythm of continuity. Across time, across culture, the thread holds steady. To love is to find a way, however strange or small, to keep someone close. The shadows in the room lengthen, and the oil lamp sputters one last time before the wick finally dies into darkness. You're left in the quiet, with the figurine resting on its mat, the wife curled beside it, and the echoes of millennia humming all around. Fading into dreams, that's where you are now, at the edge of story and sleep. The journey has taken you from household chores to whispered rituals, from gods grinning in the corners to scholars bickering over papyrus fragments. You've seen figurines cracked and clumsy, others painted with delicate care. You've heard the myths of protection, the humor of chipped noses, the soft scratch of love letters written on broken pottery. And through it all, one truth has shimmered like the Nile under moonlight. People have always found ways to hold on to each other, even in absence. The wife breathes slowly, her fingers brushing the little statue one last time before her hand falls still. You imagine her dreams, filled with her husband's voice, her children's laughter, and perhaps the gods keeping watch overhead. Outside, the desert night sighs, frogs croak, crickets hum, and the stars scatter their silver seeds across the sky. Everything feels slow now, softened, like the world itself is leaning back on a pillow. And as you sit here, you feel your own body mirror hers. Shoulders loose, breath even, eyelids heavy. The story you've followed across 15 sections has woven itself into a kind of lullaby, not with music, but with the steady rhythm of presence and longing, humor and tenderness. The figurine is still there, but you don't need to look at it anymore. Its role has been fulfilled. It has carried you across history into something gentler, the reminder that love, in all its silly, sacred forms, always finds a vessel. And when words fade, when voices fall silent, those vessels remain. Your thoughts slow, like oars dipping lazily into the Nile. Each sentence stretches longer, softer, as though the air itself is easing you down. You imagine the desert breeze cooling your skin, the quiet lap of water against the banks, the weight of sand settling into stillness. Everything becomes hushed, blurred, wrapped in the kind of calm that only comes just before sleep. The wife drifts deeper into her dreams. The gods recede into silence. The figurine keeps its mute watch. And you, too, feel the edges of the world dissolve, details blurring, sounds melting into a gentle hum, your body sinking into the quiet embrace of rest. Now let it all fade. The Nile, the stars, the little wooden husband, All of it dissolves into the soft rhythm of your breathing. You're safe, you're still, and the story has nothing more to demand of you. End of script. Sweet dreams.